The mountains of Afghanistan stretched endlessly under the pale moonlight, their jagged peaks cutting into the star-filled sky like broken glass. Staff Sergeant Marcus Thompson adjusted his night vision goggles and scanned the rocky terrain below. His SEAL team had been moving through these treacherous paths for 6 hours, their boots finding purchase on loose stones that threatened to send them tumbling into the darkness below. 2 clicks to target, whispered Lieutenant Jake Rodriguez through the comm system, his voice barely audible even through the advanced headsets they wore. The team of 8 elite Navy SEALs moved like shadows, each man carrying nearly 70 pounds of equipment while maintaining the deadly silence that had made them legendary among America's special forces. The mission briefing had been straightforward enough. Intelligence reports indicated a high-value target was holed up in a compound, nestled in a valley surrounded by these unforgiving mountains. The target was believed to be planning attacks on coalition forces, and the window of opportunity to capture him was rapidly closing. What the briefing hadn't mentioned was how isolated this particular valley was, or how the mountains seemed to swallow radio signals like hungry beasts devouring sound itself. Thompson had served 3 tours in Afghanistan and 2 in Iraq. At 32, he was one of the most experienced operators in SEAL Team 6. His weathered face bore the scars of countless missions, including a thin line across his left cheek from shrapnel in Fallujah. But something about this mission felt different. The isolation was more complete than anything he had experienced before, and the silence that surrounded them wasn't just the absence of enemy activity. It was the kind of silence that made seasoned warriors uneasy. Rodriguez, the team leader, had been pushing them hard since they inserted via helicopter 12 miles from the target location. The young lieutenant was brilliant tactically, but this was only his second deployment to Afghanistan. Thompson respected his leadership abilities, but he also knew that book knowledge and real-world experience were 2 very different things. The mountains had a way of teaching lessons that couldn't be learned in training facilities back in Virginia. The team moved in a diamond formation, with Rodriguez at point and Thompson bringing up the rear. Between them, Petty Officer First Class David "Spider" Martinez handled communications, his equipment pack bristling with antennas and sophisticated electronics that could supposedly maintain contact with their command center regardless of terrain. Corporal Tommy "Ghost" Williams carried the team's heavy machine gun, his massive frame making the 40-pound weapon look like a toy. The remaining 4 team members, Petty Officers Carson, Blake, Mitchell, and newcomer Peterson, carried specialized equipment for the mission ahead. As they crested another ridge, the target valley finally came into view below them. Through his night vision, Thompson could make out the cluster of buildings that intelligence had identified as the compound. It sat in the center of the valley like a spider in its web, surrounded by terraced fields that had been abandoned months ago when the fighting in the region intensified. The compound appeared quiet, with no movement visible around the perimeter walls. "Control, this is Eagle 7, Rodriguez whispered into his headset, using their mission call sign. "We have visual on the target. Beginning final approach." The response should have been immediate. Control always acknowledged check-ins within seconds, their professional voices providing a lifeline back to the world of backup and support that every special operations team relied upon. Instead, there was only the soft hiss of static in their earpieces. Martinez immediately began adjusting his equipment, cycling through different frequencies and checking connections. His fingers moved quickly across the radio controls, trying backup channels and emergency frequencies. Each attempt yielded the same result: nothing but electronic snow where clear communication should have been. "Must be the mountains," Martinez muttered, though his expression suggested he wasn't entirely convinced by his own explanation. "These peaks are playing hell with our signals." Thompson studied the terrain around them with growing concern. While the mountains were certainly tall enough to interfere with radio communications, they had maintained contact during their approach until just the last hour. The timing seemed more than coincidental, especially as they prepared to assault the target compound. The team took cover behind a cluster of boulders, while Martinez continued his attempts to re-establish communication. The minutes ticked by with agonizing slowness. In the special operations world, maintaining contact with headquarters wasn't just about reporting progress. It was about survival. Control provided real-time intelligence updates, coordinated support assets, and most importantly, could call in medical evacuation if things went wrong. Rodriguez made the decision that every team leader dreaded. They could abort the mission and withdraw to a location where communications might be restored, but that would mean traveling back through hostile territory and likely losing their target forever. Intelligence suggested the high-value individual would be moving locations within the next 24 hours, or they could proceed with the mission as planned, operating completely cut off from support. We didn't come this far to turn back now, Rodriguez decided after consulting with his senior team members. We maintain mission discipline and execute as planned. Communications will either come back on their own or we'll re-establish contact once we move to a different location. Thompson nodded his agreement, though privately he wished they had more experienced leadership making such critical decisions. In his years of special operations, he had learned that missions rarely went according to plan, and when they started going wrong, they had a tendency to unravel quickly. The team began their descent into the valley, moving carefully through the rocky terrain. The compound grew larger as they approached, and Thompson could make out more details through his night vision equipment. The main building was a traditional Afghan structure built around a central courtyard, with high walls providing security and privacy. Several smaller outbuildings were scattered around the perimeter, possibly housing guards or supplies. As they reached the valley floor, the silence became even more oppressive. There were no sounds of night insects, no distant dogs barking, none of the ambient noise that typically filled Afghan nights. It was as if the valley itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. Martinez made one final attempt to raise control on the radio. He extended a telescoping antenna to its full height and boosted the transmission power to maximum. The effort drew nothing but static. Confirming what they all already knew, they were completely on their own. Rodriguez signaled for the team to spread out and begin their approach to the compound. According to their intelligence, the target would be sleeping in the main building, likely with minimal security given the remote location. The plan called for a swift, silent entry, capture of the high-value individual, and immediate extraction to a predetermined pickup point where their helicopter would be waiting. Thompson checked his watch. 024, 5 hours. They had been moving for nearly 8 hours since insertion, and the adrenaline that had sustained them during the long approach was beginning to fade, replaced by the cold calculation that marked the beginning of actual combat operations. Every SEAL on the team had executed dozens of similar missions, but none under such complete communication isolation. As they moved closer to the compound walls, Thompson couldn't shake the feeling that something was fundamentally wrong about the entire situation. The silence was too complete, the isolation too perfect. In his experience, even the most remote locations in Afghanistan had some signs of life. Guards moving on patrol routes, the glow of cigarettes in watchtowers, the sound of voices or radios from inside buildings. This compound appeared absolutely dead, as if it had been abandoned for months rather than days. Yet their intelligence had been specific and recent. Satellite imagery from just 18 hours earlier had shown activity around the buildings, including vehicles and personnel movement. Rodriguez raised his hand, signaling the team to halt 50 meters from the compound wall. They had reached the point of no return. Once they breached the perimeter, they would be committed to completing the mission, regardless of what they found inside. Without radio contact, there would be no possibility of calling for backup or extraction if the situation deteriorated. The 8 SEALs lay motionless in the shadows, each man running through his assigned tasks one final time. In a few minutes, they would discover whether their intelligence was accurate, whether their target was actually present, and whether the silence surrounding them was simply a result of their isolated location or something far more sinister. Thompson closed his eyes briefly and said a silent prayer, not for success, but for the wisdom to recognize danger before it was too late. In the mountains of Afghanistan, surrounded by a silence that felt almost supernatural, 8 of America's most elite warriors prepared to step into the unknown. Rodriguez gave the signal, and the team moved forward with practiced precision. Carson and Blake approached the main gate while Williams and Mitchell flanked around to the eastern wall where intelligence photos had shown a potential breach point. Thompson and Martinez took position to cover the western approach, while Peterson remained with Rodriguez as they prepared to follow the entry team. The compound's outer wall stood 12 feet high, constructed from the same weathered stone that seemed to make up half the mountains in Afghanistan. Carson produced a small explosive charge designed for silent wall breaching, a specialized piece of equipment that would create an opening without the thunderous blast of conventional explosives. As Carson worked to place the charge, Blake kept watch through his night vision scope, scanning for any sign of guards or defensive positions. The continued silence from within the compound was becoming more unsettling by the minute. Even if the inhabitants were asleep, there should have been some indication of human presence. A guard walking a patrol route, the soft glow of electronic equipment, something to suggest life within the walls. Thompson watched the operation unfold while fighting against a growing sense of unease. His instincts, sharpened by years of combat experience, were screaming that something was fundamentally wrong with this entire scenario. The intelligence that had led them here seemed almost too convenient, too clean. High-value targets rarely position themselves in locations this isolated, without significant security measures. The shaped charge detonated with a muffled thump, creating a hole in the stone wall just large enough for a man to crawl through. Carson immediately slipped inside, his weapon raised and ready. Blake followed seconds later, and their voices came through the team's earpieces in urgent whispers. Clear on entry point. Moving toward main building. No visual on security. No lights, no movement. Rodriguez motioned for the rest of the team to advance. They moved through the breach point one by one, maintaining their tactical spacing as they entered the compound's central courtyard. The space was larger than it had appeared from outside, with the main building dominating the center, and several smaller structures arranged around the perimeter. Thompson's boots touched the packed earth of the courtyard, and immediately he noticed something that made his blood run cold. There were no footprints in the dust. The fine layer of dirt and sand that covered the ground showed no signs of recent human activity. No boot prints, no tire tracks, no evidence that anyone had walked through this space in weeks or possibly months. Martinez was still attempting to raise control on the radio, his equipment pack bristling with antennas as he tried different frequencies and power settings. The mountain-rimmed valley continued to swallow their transmissions, leaving them in complete isolation from the outside world. "Building's dark," whispered Blake from his position near the main entrance. No heat signatures showing on thermal. Thompson moved to examine one of the smaller outbuildings while the entry team prepared to breach the main structure. The wooden door hung slightly ajar, creaking softly in the mountain breeze. He pushed it open with the barrel of his rifle and stepped inside, his night vision revealing a small room that had clearly been abandoned for an extended period. Dust covered every surface in a thick layer. Spider webs stretched across the corners, some of them elaborate constructions that would have taken weeks to build. Most telling of all, there were no recent disturbances in the dust patterns on the floor. Nobody had entered this building in months. "Rodriguez," Thompson called softly through his headset. "We need to talk." But the team leader was already committed to the assault plan. Carson and Blake had reached the main building's entrance and were preparing to force entry. Rodriguez positioned himself to follow them inside, while Williams established a covering position in the courtyard. The main door proved to be unlocked, swinging open at Blake's touch. The SEALs flowed inside with textbook precision, their weapons covering every angle as they moved through rooms that their intelligence had suggested would be occupied by their high-value target and his security detail. Instead, they found more of the same: rooms covered in dust, furniture that hadn't been moved in months, and the unmistakable signs of long-term abandonment. Spider webs covered doorways, and in several rooms, small animals had clearly been nesting undisturbed for extended periods. "This place is dead," Carson's voice came through the comm system. "Nobody's been here in months, maybe longer." Thompson felt his worst fears being confirmed. The intelligence that had brought them to this remote location was either completely wrong or deliberately false. Neither possibility boded well for the team's current situation. As the search of the main building continued, Martinez managed to get a brief burst of static-filled communication through to headquarters. The transmission lasted only seconds before cutting out again, but it was enough to send a priority message: "Control, Eagle 7. Target location empty. Repeat. Target location appears abandoned. Requesting immediate extraction." The response, when it came through several minutes later as a brief break in the electronic interference, was not what they wanted to hear. "Eagle 7, Control. No extraction assets available at this time. Continue mission as briefed. Maintain position until further notice." The transmission cut off before Rodriguez could respond, leaving the team stranded in an abandoned compound in one of the most remote valleys in Afghanistan, with no clear understanding of why they had been sent there in the first place. Thompson gathered with Rodriguez and Martinez near the main building's entrance to discuss their rapidly deteriorating situation. The younger officers wanted to continue searching the compound thoroughly, believing that they might find intelligence materials or equipment that could justify the mission. "Lieutenant, with all due respect, we need to get out of here," Thompson said, his voice low but urgent. "This whole thing stinks. Our intelligence was either completely wrong or we've been set up." Rodriguez considered the options, his youthful face showing the strain of command in an impossible situation. As team leader, he was responsible for the safety of 7 other men, but he was also responsible for completing their assigned mission. "We'll conduct a thorough search of all buildings," Rodriguez decided. "If we don't find anything in the next 30 minutes, we'll move to the extraction point and wait for pickup." The team spread out to search the remaining structures systematically. Each building told the same story: long-term abandonment, no recent human activity, and definitely no signs of the high-value target they had been sent to capture. Peterson, the newest member of the team, discovered something in one of the storage buildings that sent chills through everyone who saw it. Hidden beneath a canvas tarp were several wooden crates containing weapons and ammunition. Not the typical AK-47s and RPGs that insurgents usually cached, but high-end American military equipment including M4 rifles, advanced night vision gear, and sophisticated communication devices. Where the hell did this stuff come from? Williams muttered as he examined one of the rifles. The weapon was in perfect condition, with serial numbers that had been partially filed away. Thompson studied the cache with growing alarm. The presence of American military equipment in an abandoned compound raised questions that he didn't want to consider. Had this location been used by friendly forces at some point? Was it a CIA safe house? Or was there something much more sinister at play? Martinez continued his attempts to re-establish communication with headquarters, but the electronic interference seemed to be getting worse rather than better. Even his most powerful equipment was generating nothing but static and electronic noise. As the 30-minute search deadline approached, the team reconvened in the courtyard. They had found no trace of their supposed target, but the discovery of the weapons cache had raised new questions about the nature of their mission. "We're moving to the extraction point," Rodriguez announced. "Whatever intelligence brought us here was wrong, and I don't like the feel of this place." But as the SEALs prepared to leave the compound, Thompson noticed something that made his heart race. Fresh tire tracks in the dust outside the main gate. Tracks that definitely hadn't been there when they arrived. Someone had been watching them search the compound. Someone who had left while they were inside the buildings, probably heading to higher ground where they could continue their surveillance. The 8 SEALs were no longer alone in the valley, and whoever was watching them had chosen to remain hidden rather than make contact. In Thompson's experience, that usually meant only one thing: the watchers were not friendly. Rodriguez gathered the team for an immediate departure, but as they prepared to leave through the breach point they had created, the silence of the Afghan night was suddenly shattered by a sound that every combat veteran immediately recognized. The distinctive crack of a high-powered rifle, firing from somewhere in the mountains above them. The rifle shot echoed through the valley like thunder, bouncing off the rocky walls and creating a series of reverberations that made it impossible to determine the exact source. Thompson's training kicked in immediately as he dove for cover behind a stone wall, his mind automatically calculating angles and distances based on the sound signature. "Sniper!" Rodriguez shouted into his headset, though the warning was unnecessary. Every member of the SEAL team had already taken defensive positions, their years of combat experience making their reactions automatic and instantaneous. A second shot followed within seconds, the bullet striking the ground near Peterson's position and sending up a spray of dirt and stone fragments. The newcomer rolled behind a wooden cart that had been abandoned in the courtyard, his face pale but determined as he tried to locate the source of the incoming fire. Thompson pressed himself against the cold stone wall and tried to analyze the tactical situation. The shots were coming from elevated positions somewhere in the mountains that surrounded the valley, which gave the sniper significant advantages in terms of range and concealment. The acoustic signature suggested a high-powered rifle, possibly a .308 or .300 Winchester Magnum, weapons capable of accurate fire at distances exceeding 800 meters. "Martinez, get on that radio and get us some support," Rodriguez commanded, his voice tight with tension. But Martinez was already working frantically with his communication equipment, cycling through frequencies and boosting power levels in desperate attempts to break through the electronic interference that had been plaguing them all night. "Still nothing, Lieutenant," Martinez reported. "It's like someone's jamming us deliberately." Williams had managed to get his heavy machine gun into position behind a low wall that ran along the eastern edge of the courtyard. The big gunner swept the surrounding ridgelines with his night vision scope, searching for muzzle flashes or movement that might reveal the sniper's location. A third shot rang out, this one much closer to Blake's position near the main building. The bullet struck the wall just inches from his head, sending chips of stone flying in all directions. Blake scrambled to a better defensive position while calling out observations to the rest of the team. "Single shooter, firing from the north ridge," Blake reported. "Approximate range 600 to 800 meters. I can't get a visual on the position." Thompson studied the tactical situation with growing concern. They were trapped in low ground with limited cover, facing a sniper who held all the advantages of position and concealment. Worse, their communication systems remained completely ineffective, meaning no possibility of calling in air support or artillery strikes that might neutralize the threat. The team's standard operating procedures for sniper contact involved immediate suppressive fire, followed by coordinated movement to close the distance, but the extreme range and elevated position made those tactics impractical. Any attempt to assault uphill across open ground would likely result in multiple casualties. "We need to get out of this valley," Thompson told Rodriguez during a brief lull in the incoming fire. "Staying here is suicide." Rodriguez nodded, his young features showing the strain of command under fire. "Carson, Blake, can you provide covering fire while we move to the vehicles?" But there were no vehicles. The SEAL team had inserted by helicopter and was scheduled for extraction at a predetermined location several kilometers from the compound. Their only option was movement on foot through terrain that favored the sniper. Another shot cracked through the darkness, this one aimed at Martinez as he struggled with his radio equipment. The communications specialist threw himself flat as the bullet passed close enough that he could hear its supersonic passage. "This guy's good," Martinez muttered. "Military training, probably special forces." Thompson had reached the same conclusion. The precision of the shots combined with the patience the sniper was showing between engagements suggested professional military training rather than typical insurgent tactics. Whoever was hunting them knew exactly what they were doing. Williams opened fire with his machine gun, sending long bursts toward the suspected sniper position on the north ridge. The heavy bullets struck the rocky slopes with showers of sparks, but the distance was too great for accurate fire with the weapon's iron sights. The suppressive fire did force the sniper to pause his shooting briefly, but it also revealed Williams's position to return fire. The sniper's response was immediate and devastating. A carefully aimed shot struck the stone wall just in front of Williams' position, sending fragments into his face and forcing him to abandon his firing position. Blood ran down the big gunner's cheek from multiple small cuts, but he managed to relocate with his weapon intact. "Movement on the east ridge," Carson called out. "I've got at least 2 figures moving through the rocks." Thompson felt his heart sink as he realized their situation was deteriorating rapidly. If there were multiple shooters positioning themselves on different ridgelines, the SEAL team would soon be caught in a crossfire with no possibility of escape. Rodriguez made the decision that every special operations leader dreaded, authorizing withdrawal under fire. "We're moving out," he announced. "Bound and cover movement toward the south end of the valley. Williams and Thompson, your rear guard." The SEALs began their tactical withdrawal, moving in small groups while others provided covering fire. The process was painfully slow, as each movement had to be carefully coordinated to avoid exposing team members to sniper fire from the elevated positions. Peterson, still the newest member of the team, struggled with the psychological pressure of being hunted by unseen shooters. During one movement phase, he broke from cover too early and found himself exposed in the open courtyard when the sniper fired again. The bullet struck the young SEAL in the shoulder, spinning him around and dropping him to the ground. His agonized cry echoed through the compound, as Thompson immediately began moving to assist him, knowing that leaving wounded behind was not an option. "Man down!" Thompson called out as he sprinted across the open ground toward Peterson's position. The sniper fired twice more during his run, both shots missing by narrow margins that Thompson could measure in inches rather than feet. Peterson was conscious but in severe pain, the high-powered rifle round having torn through muscle and possibly shattered bone in his shoulder. Thompson quickly applied a pressure bandage while assessing the extent of the injury under fire. "Can you move?" Thompson asked. Peterson nodded grimly, though his face was pale with shock and blood loss. "I can make it." But moving a wounded team member through hostile territory while under observation by skilled marksmen was a nightmare scenario for any special operations team. Their rate of movement would be drastically reduced, and Peterson would need medical attention that they couldn't provide in the field. Martinez finally managed to get a brief burst of communication through to headquarters, the transmission lasting just long enough to send a desperate message. "Control, Eagle 7, taking sniper fire. 1 wounded. Request immediate close air support and medical evacuation." The response, when it came several minutes later through heavy static, was barely comprehensible. "Eagle 7, no assets available. Maintain position, extraction delayed indefinitely." The communication cut off again, leaving the team with the terrible realization that they were completely on their own. No air support, no artillery, no medical evacuation, and no immediate extraction. 8 SEALs, 1 wounded, trapped in a valley with unknown numbers of enemy snipers holding the high ground. Thompson helped Peterson to his feet and began moving him toward better cover, while the rest of the team continued their tactical withdrawal. The sniper fire had become more sporadic, suggesting that the shooters were repositioning to maintain contact as the SEALs attempted to escape. As they reached the southern end of the valley, Carson made a discovery that changed everything about their tactical situation. Hidden among the rocks was a series of prepared fighting positions, complete with camouflaged covers and fields of fire that commanded the entire valley floor. "This is a kill zone," Carson reported. "The whole valley's been set up as an ambush site." The implications hit Thompson immediately. They hadn't stumbled into a random encounter with insurgent snipers. This was a carefully planned operation, with the abandoned compound serving as bait to draw them into a prepared ambush. The false intelligence, the communication interference, the strategic positioning of the shooters. It all pointed to a level of planning and coordination that suggested inside knowledge of their mission. Rodriguez gathered the team in the limited cover available at the valley's southern end, while Peterson received additional medical attention. The young lieutenant's face showed the weight of command as he realized the true nature of their situation. They were not conducting a capture mission against a high-value target. They were the targets, and someone with detailed knowledge of special operations tactics had led them into a trap that was designed to kill or capture an entire SEAL team. In the darkness above them, the snipers continued their patient hunt, knowing that time was on their side and that eventually the Americans would have to move through terrain that offered no concealment from the watching eyes in the mountains. The mountain silence stretched for nearly 20 minutes, broken only by Peterson's labored breathing and the occasional sound of shifting equipment. Thompson used the lull to reassess their tactical situation, studying the terrain features that might offer concealment during their eventual breakout attempt. The valley's southern exit was a narrow passage between 2 steep ridgelines, creating a natural bottleneck that any competent enemy would certainly have under observation. To the east and west, the slopes were too steep for tactical movement, especially with a wounded team member who was losing blood despite their field medical efforts. Rodriguez huddled with his senior team members, their voices barely audible even at close range. The young lieutenant was facing the kind of command crisis that no training exercise could fully prepare an officer for. Responsibility for 7 other lives in a situation that appeared to have no good options. "We can't stay here," Thompson whispered. "Peterson needs real medical attention, and we're sitting targets once daylight comes." Martinez continued his attempt to penetrate the communication blackout, but his sophisticated equipment was yielding nothing but electronic noise. The interference pattern suggested deliberate jamming rather than natural terrain effects, confirming Thompson's suspicion that they were facing a well-prepared adversary with significant technical capabilities. Williams had positioned himself where he could observe the ridgelines through his night vision scope, watching for any sign of movement among the rocks above them. The big gunner's face was grim as he reported his observations to the team leadership. "I count at least 4 positions with active shooters," Williams said. "They're good at staying concealed, but I can see occasional movement when they adjust their positions. Military training, definitely." The tactical picture was becoming increasingly clear to Thompson. This wasn't a random insurgent attack or even a well-planned ambush by local fighters. The level of coordination, the sophisticated equipment required for the communication jamming, and the professional marksmanship they had encountered all pointed to something much more serious. Blake, who had been studying the terrain with his own optics, made a suggestion that offered their first real hope for escape. "There's a ravine about 200 meters to the east that runs up into the mountains. It's not visible from most of the sniper positions, and it might give us a covered route out of the valley." Thompson examined the area Blake had identified, noting that the ravine appeared to have been carved by water runoff during the spring snowmelt. It was deep enough to provide concealment from elevated observation, and it led generally in the direction they needed to travel to reach their extraction point. But reaching the ravine would require crossing 200 meters of relatively open ground while under potential observation from multiple sniper positions. With a wounded team member, the movement would be slow and extremely dangerous. Rodriguez made the command decision to attempt the breakout. "We move in 2 groups. Thompson, Williams, and Peterson in the first group. Rest of us provide covering fire and follow once you're in position." The plan was simple but risky. Thompson and Williams would help Peterson across the open ground, while the rest of the team engaged the known sniper positions with suppressive fire. Once the first group reached the ravine, they would provide cover while the remaining SEALs made their own crossing. Thompson checked Peterson's condition one more time. The young SEAL was pale and clearly in pain, but he was conscious and determined to keep moving. The pressure bandage had slowed the bleeding, but he was definitely going to need surgical attention soon. "You ready for this?" Thompson asked. Peterson managed a weak smile. "Let's get the hell out of here." Rodriguez signaled the beginning of the operation, and Carson, Blake, Martinez, and Mitchell opened fire simultaneously on the suspected sniper positions. Their coordinated shots created enough muzzle flash and noise to draw attention, while Thompson and Williams began moving Peterson toward the ravine. The response from the mountains was immediate and devastating. Multiple rifles opened fire from positions that the SEALs hadn't even identified, creating a crossfire that swept the valley floor with deadly precision. Bullets struck the rocks around the moving Americans, creating showers of stone fragments and ricochet sparks. Thompson realized with growing horror that they had drastically underestimated the number of enemy shooters. There weren't 4 snipers as Williams had estimated. There were at least 8, possibly more, positioned on multiple ridgelines with overlapping fields of fire. "Abort," Rodriguez called out, but Thompson and Williams were already committed to the movement. Stopping in the open ground would be certain death, so they continued their desperate sprint toward the ravine, while bullets cracked through the air around them. Peterson stumbled during the crossing, his wounded shoulder causing him to lose balance on the uneven ground. Thompson caught him and half-carried, half-dragged the injured SEAL the remaining distance to the ravine entrance. Williams reached the position first, immediately establishing a defensive position and returning fire toward the muzzle flashes he could see among the rocks above. His machine gun chattered in controlled bursts, providing enough suppression to allow Thompson and Peterson to reach cover. The ravine was deeper than it had appeared from a distance, with walls nearly 10 feet high that provided excellent protection from the elevated sniper positions. Thompson helped Peterson down into the rocky channel while Williams continued his covering fire. But as the rest of the SEAL team prepared to follow them across the open ground, a new sound echoed through the valley, the distinctive whine of incoming mortars. The enemy wasn't just equipped with sniper rifles. They had indirect fire capabilities as well. The first mortar round exploded near the compound, sending up a geyser of dirt and stone. The second landed closer to the SEAL team's position, close enough that the concussion wave knocked Martinez off his feet. "Mortars! Take cover!" Rodriguez shouted, but there was precious little cover available in their current position. The team scattered among the available rocks and depressions, trying to minimize their exposure to the falling explosives. Thompson realized that their situation had moved beyond desperate into the realm of the impossible. They were facing a well-equipped enemy force with superior numbers, better positions, and indirect fire support. Even if they managed to escape the valley, they would be moving through hostile territory with no communication and no possibility of support. From his position in the ravine, Thompson could see that Rodriguez and the remaining team members were pinned down by accurate mortar fire. Any attempt to cross the open ground to the ravine would be suicide under the current conditions. Peterson was fading fast, his face gray with blood loss and shock. Williams was running low on ammunition after his sustained covering fire. The tactical situation was rapidly approaching the point where survival would require abandoning wounded team members, a decision that no SEAL would ever willingly make. Then, just as Thompson was beginning to accept that they might not survive this engagement, a new sound cut through the chaos of gunfire and explosions. It was distant at first, barely audible over the sound of combat, but growing steadily louder, the distinctive whoop, whoop, whoop of helicopter rotors echoing off the mountain walls. Martinez's earlier communication attempts had apparently gotten through after all, though it had taken hours for support assets to reach their remote location. Thompson could see the aircraft's navigation lights as it approached from the south, flying low through the mountain passes. The enemy fire shifted immediately, with several of the sniper positions engaging the incoming helicopter. Tracer rounds streaked through the darkness as the aircraft's door gunners returned fire, their heavy machine guns raking the ridgelines where muzzle flashes revealed enemy positions. The helicopter pilot demonstrated exceptional skill, using the terrain to mask his approach, while his gunners provided devastating suppressive fire. The aircraft settled into a hover just outside the valley mouth, its crew chief directing covering fire, while a rescue team prepared to extract the stranded SEALs. But Thompson realized with growing dread that the helicopter was too far away for Peterson to reach in his current condition. The wounded SEAL would never survive a movement through that much hostile territory, especially under the heavy fire that the enemy was directing at the aircraft. Rodriguez made the hardest decision any military leader ever faces. Over the radio, his voice cracking with emotion, he called out the words that every special operations warrior dreads. "This is Eagle 7. We have wounded who cannot move to extraction point. Request immediate close air support on marked positions." What Rodriguez was asking for was danger close airstrikes, bombs and rockets delivered so close to friendly positions that the attacking aircraft's crew would be firing almost on top of American forces. It was a desperate gambit that could easily kill the very people it was meant to save. But sometimes desperate situations require desperate measures, and the helicopter pilot understood exactly what Rodriguez was requesting. Within minutes, the sound of fast-moving jets could be heard approaching from the east, their engines screaming as they descended toward the valley at attack speed. The first airstrike hit the northern ridgeline with devastating precision, the explosion lighting up the mountainside and silencing at least 3 of the enemy sniper positions. The second strike targeted the mortar position, creating a fireball that could be seen for miles across the Afghan landscape. In the sudden silence that followed the airstrikes, Thompson helped Peterson to his feet and began moving him toward the helicopter's position. Williams provided covering fire, while the rest of the SEAL team executed a fighting withdrawal from their positions around the compound. The extraction was a textbook example of special operations teamwork under fire. Despite the odds against them, despite the sophisticated ambush that had nearly claimed their lives, all 8 SEALs made it to the helicopter and began the flight back to safety. As the aircraft climbed away from the valley, Thompson looked back at the compound where they had spent the most dangerous hours of their military careers. Fires still burned on the ridgelines where the airstrikes had found their targets, and he wondered who had set such an elaborate trap for an American special operations team. The answers to those questions would have to wait for intelligence analysts and investigation teams. For now, it was enough that 8 SEALs who had entered a valley of death had emerged alive to fight another day. Peterson received emergency medical treatment during the flight and would make a full recovery. The mission itself was classified as a failure, no high-value target captured, no intelligence gathered, and 1 team member wounded. But in the special operations community, sometimes the greatest success is simply bringing everyone home alive. The sniper who had shattered the darkness that night was never identified, and the true purpose behind the elaborate ambush remained a mystery that would haunt Thompson for years to come. But in the mountains of Afghanistan, Where American warriors faced enemies in the shadows, sometimes survival itself was victory enough.